On December 2, 2025, the East China Sea awoke under a heavy, uneasy silence. The horizon was shrouded in gray, and the air was thick with anticipation. But the tension in these waters ran far deeper than the churning waves or the threat of a coming storm. That morning, two Chinese Coast Guard ships crossed into waters that Japan staunchly claims as its own, edging dangerously close to the disputed Senkaku Islands, a flashpoint in the long-standing rivalry between the two nations. Their focus was a single, vulnerable Japanese fishing boat, going about its daily work in contested territory, suddenly caught in the middle of a geopolitical chess match. Responding with urgency, a Japanese Coast Guard vessel raced to the scene, maneuvering itself between the Chinese ships and the fishing boat, determined to shield its citizens and assert Japan's claim. Over the radio, Japanese authorities issued a firm demand. The Chinese vessels must leave these waters at once, warning of consequences if they did not comply. For hours, the two sides engaged in a tense maritime standoff, their ships locked in a silent battle of wills, neither side willing to yield an inch. Eventually, the Chinese ships turned away and withdrew. But the incident left a lingering sense of unease, a stark reminder of just how volatile this region remains. In Tokyo, officials condemned the incursion, calling it a clear violation of international law and a direct challenge to Japan's sovereignty over the islands. Japanese leaders see these repeated incursions as part of a broader Chinese strategy, gray zone tactics designed to gradually undermine Japanese control without triggering outright war. China, for its part, insists its Coast Guard was simply enforcing the law in what it considers Chinese waters, arguing that the Japanese fishing boat had crossed into their territory. Both governments remain steadfast, each vowing to defend their claims and their people, underscoring the deep and persistent divide over these rocky, uninhabited islands. This standoff is just one episode in a much larger ongoing struggle, a dangerous contest for control and influence in the East China Sea that shows no sign of ending soon. Japan's claim to the Senkaku Islands is rooted in its 1895 incorporation, which Tokyo insists was legal under international law. According to Japanese records, the islands were surveyed and found to be uninhabited and without evidence of prior control by any other nation. This, Japan argues, justified their formal annexation at the end of the 19th century, a move that was carefully documented in government archives and official proclamations. Japan argues the islands were unclaimed, and after extensive surveys, it established peaceful administration and private ownership. Japanese settlers even established small communities, engaging in activities like fishing and collecting albatross feathers, further reinforcing Japan's presence and administration over the territory. After World War II, the U.S. administered the islands as part of the Ryukyu Islands, using them for military purposes. In 1972, the United States returned administrative rights to Japan alongside Okinawa, an act Tokyo sees as international recognition of its sovereignty, even though the U.S. took no position on ultimate ownership. Japan maintains there is no dispute. The islands are inherently Japanese, and only after reports of potential oil reserves nearby did China and Taiwan assert their own claims in the 1970s. For decades before, Japan says, its sovereignty was uncontested, and the islands were administered as part of Okinawa Prefecture. In 2012, Japan nationalized several islands to prevent a provocative purchase by a nationalist governor, framing it as a move for stability and to avoid escalating tensions. The Japanese government argued that nationalization was necessary to ensure calm management and prevent any unilateral actions that could inflame the situation. China, however, saw this as a grave provocation, arguing it broke a tacit agreement to shelve the dispute. The move sparked widespread protests in China and led to a sharp deterioration in diplomatic relations, with Beijing accusing Tokyo of changing the status quo. For Japan, it was an internal administrative matter. For China, it marked a new era of confrontation. The two sides have since engaged in heated diplomatic exchanges, each accusing the other of provocation and refusing to compromise on their respective positions. The islands remain a flashpoint, with both sides refusing to budge. Today, patrol ships from both countries regularly face off in the surrounding waters, underscoring how history, law, and national pride continue to fuel one of East Asia's most volatile territorial disputes. China's claim to the Diaoyu Islands stretches back centuries, citing Ming Dynasty records and maps as proof of early discovery and use. Beijing argues the islands were part of Taiwan, ceded to Japan after the First Sino-Japanese War, and should have been returned after World War II. China sees the U.S. transfer of the islands to Japan in 1972 as illegitimate, a Cold War relic that must be corrected. For China, the islands are a symbol of sovereignty and a painful reminder of past humiliations. The dispute is deeply tied to historical grievances and national pride, making compromise politically impossible. State media and public sentiment reinforce Beijing's hardline stance. The Diaoyu Islands have become a rallying point for China's resurgence. Any concession is seen as unacceptable, fueling a cycle of confrontation. The Senkaku Diaoyu Islands are barren, but their value lies in what surrounds them. They sit atop potential oil and gas reserves and are surrounded by rich fishing grounds, critical resources for both nations. Control means exclusive economic rights to these assets. The islands also occupy a strategic location along vital shipping lanes, key to global trade. For China, they're part of the first island chain, crucial for projecting naval power into the Pacific. For Japan, holding the islands upholds the post-war order and its alliance with the U.S. The U.S. has pledged to defend the islands under its security treaty with Japan. The standoff is a test of international law and regional power. The outcome could set a precedent for other disputes across Asia. Tensions spiked in November 2025, not at sea, but in Tokyo. Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, broke with decades of ambiguity by suggesting Japan might intervene militarily if China attacked Taiwan. This statement directly challenged Beijing's One China principle and linked Taiwan's security to Japan's. The move was seen in China as a step toward Japanese remilitarization and interference in internal affairs. With China's military growing rapidly, and Taiwan just 110 kilometers from Japan's Yonaguni Island, Tokyo's sense of vulnerability increased. Takaichi's comments merged the Taiwan and Senkaku Diaoyu disputes, raising the stakes for both sides. Beijing viewed this as an unforgivable provocation, escalating rhetoric and action. The region braced for a new phase of confrontation. Beijing's response to Takaichi's remarks was swift and severe. China demanded a retraction, summoned Japan's ambassador, and issued public threats. A Chinese consul in Osaka posted a thinly veiled threat online, prompting Tokyo to protest. China's defense ministry warned Japan that intervention in Taiwan would be doomed to fail. The rhetoric moved from diplomacy to direct military threats, raising the stakes. Communication channels froze as both sides hardened their positions. The issues of Taiwan and the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands became inseparable flashpoints. China increased pressure on Japan in the East China Sea, turning the islands into a primary arena for confrontation. The risk of escalation grew with every exchange. China quickly turned to economic pressure. It issued a travel advisory, warning citizens against visiting Japan, threatening a tourism industry that relies heavily on Chinese visitors. The education sector was next, with China urging students to reconsider studying in Japan, disrupting a major source of revenue for Japanese universities. Airlines offered free refunds, and Chinese imports of Japanese seafood were suspended, hitting coastal communities hard. Cultural exchanges were cancelled, and the economic impact was immediate. China's playbook is well established. Use economic leverage to punish political adversaries. Past bans on tourism and imports have cost other countries billions. By targeting Japan's economy, Beijing hopes to create domestic pressure on Tokyo to soften its stance. The message is clear: challenge China, and your economy will pay the price. The fallout spread across tourism, education, trade, and culture. Economic coercion became another front in the dispute. China matched economic and diplomatic pressure with military might. In the days around the December 2nd incident, Chinese aircraft and ships surged near Taiwan and Japan's southwestern islands. Drones flew close to Yonaguni, Japan's nearest island to Taiwan, challenging Japanese air defenses. These maneuvers gathered intelligence and normalized China's military presence. China's new aircraft carrier, the Fujian, entered service, symbolizing Beijing's growing naval ambitions. The constant exercises keep Japanese and Taiwanese forces on high alert, serving as psychological warfare. Each sortie and patrol is a calculated move to assert dominance and change the status quo. The risk of miscalculation and conflict has never been higher. The East China Sea dispute may seem like a distant local issue, but its impact stretches far beyond the region, sending ripples across the entire globe. What happens here doesn't just affect the countries involved, it has the potential to influence the lives of people on every continent. In both China and Japan, powerful waves of nationalism and deep-rooted historical grievances fuel a cycle of tension and escalation. Memories of past conflicts linger, shaping public opinion and government policy, making compromise difficult and mistrust common. The conflict is more than a territorial dispute. It's a test for Asia's future, pitting two of the region's most influential powers against each other in a high-stakes contest for influence and security. The outcome here could set a precedent for how other regional disputes are handled, especially in the South China Sea, where multiple nations have overlapping claims and tensions are already high. If China prevails, it may embolden similar tactics elsewhere, encouraging other nations to assert their claims more aggressively. If Japan holds firm, it reinforces the current international order and the rules that have governed maritime disputes for decades. The stakes are not just strategic, they're economic. Trillions of dollars in global trade pass through these waters every year, making the East China Sea a vital artery for the world economy. Any conflict or prolonged standoff could disrupt global supply chains and financial markets, leading to shortages, price spikes, and uncertainty for consumers and businesses worldwide. The U.S.-Japan Security Treaty means that any attack or escalation could draw in the world's largest militaries, raising the stakes even higher and potentially transforming a regional dispute into a global crisis. The stability of the Indo-Pacific, and, by extension, the world, depends on careful, skillful management of this volatile dispute. Diplomacy, restraint, and international cooperation are more important than ever. How China and Japan navigate the complex web of history, nationalism, and power will not only define their own futures, but will also shape the course of the 21st century for everyone on the planet.